Welcome back. All right, so I watch as much hockey as I can. I try to watch every single team an equal amount of time for videos like this and, of course, for power rankings. I don't feel like giving out a power rankings when you're not watching teams equally is fair, so I do my best with that. And as you can tell from the comment section, I nail it every time, right? Um, yeah, that's what it is. That's what they tell me. So today I want to talk about players that have impressed me so far this year who maybe aren't being talked about as much. Some of these guys are being talked about somewhat, maybe locally, but I don't feel like necessarily there's as much talking about them. So I've got Pacific Division teams, Metro Division teams, then the Atlantic, and then the Central. I went in that order, starting with Vancouver and ending with Nashville. And I did find a player for every single team. With Vancouver, a former Nashville Predators player is my pick here, and that's Kiefer Sherwood. Sherwood's been absolutely fantastic for Vancouver. He hits, he can score, he's got some speed, he's got that bite to his game that Vancouver fans really do enjoy. I remember dating back to Tiger Williams, and prior to that, prior to me watching hockey, there were Canucks who could drop the gloves if they needed to. And Sherwood's got that bit of an edge, so I'm very glad that the Canucks picked him up. This season hasn't gone as smoothly as last year, but Sherwood's been excellent. For the LA Kings, player I've talked about before, everybody knows I'm a fan of Warren Foegele. Fogel's fit in very well in LA. And I remember when they signed him, there was some rumblings, and definitely the offseason that LA had, there were some Kings fans that weren't very happy with moves that were made. But I think Fogel's fit in really well. The offense is there too, but he provides a little bit of everything. He can play up and down the lineup. I've been a big fan of Fogel's game for a long time, and his transition to LA has not changed that in the slightest. For Seattle, I'm going to give credit where credit's due. I saw an article on this today too, even though I made this list last night, or actually yesterday morning. But Shane Wright, healthy scratched and reacts to it the way that you want to see a player react to being scratched from the lineup. When they come back into the lineup, they're much better. Shane Wright's been driving more of the play. He's not a primary scorer at this point, but at least he's trending in that direction. He's got 7 goals now on the season. It's definitely turned into a pretty good season for Wright when it looked like a disaster just a couple weeks ago. So that would be my pick for Seattle. For Calgary, a little bit of credit here to a goaltender, Dan Vladar. When they traded Markstrom in the offseason, that was to bring up Wolf. Wolf's been the starter mostly, but Vladar's played very well. And, dating back years, what if Boston had kept Vladar? Right? So it's just one of those things that stands out to me. Vladar's actually been a pretty good goaltender. He's not like all-star level or anything, but he's played pretty well for Calgary, and I felt like his name should get on the board. Because we talk a lot about Wolf and how well he's played, but I think Vladar deserves some credit as well. For the Vegas Golden Knights, Tanner Pearson. When they picked up Pearson on a PTO, I wasn't sure whether or not he'd get into the lineup for them because Pearson has had injury issues over the years. His play had kind of tailed off the last couple of years when he was in the lineup. But it looks like he's a seamless fit into the Vegas Golden Knights lineup. And he's been fun to watch. Pearson looks like he's having a good time playing hockey for the first time in a while, and that's great to see. So Pearson on a winning team, playing well. And his production's been pretty good too in a secondary role for Vegas. So good on him. For the Oilers, their bottom 6 doesn't get a lot of discussion, but I'm going to give credit to Adam Henrique. His overall numbers, the offense isn't what it was years back, but I think he's playing well for them. He's generating opportunities, and the bottom lines there that he's been playing on have been good. So full credit to Adam Henrique as he goes from more of that offensive role that he had earlier in his career to now playing that more of a defensive leadership type role. And I think he does that pretty well for the Edmonton Oilers. San Jose. So if you heard or watched my recent interview with Ted Ramey from the Sharks, Zetterlund. When he asked me about Zetterlund, I was very praising of Fabian Zetterlund. I think Zetterlund is an underrated player. I've thought that since he was in New Jersey, though, but he's having a very good year in San Jose. And that line he has sometimes with Eklund and Granlund, it's not a bad little line there. And I don't think Zetterlund weighs anybody down. So that is one of those things to keep in mind from the Timo Meier deal. He was part of that. That Timo Meier trade nowhere near as lopsided as it looked at the time that it was made. For Anaheim, Anaheim's defensive numbers have been good in part because their goaltending's been good, but Olin Zellweger has had a very good season. So while Cam Fowler, it feels like, is, trending towards not necessarily the end of his career, but later years of his career, Zellweger looks like he's going to be the next guy. And it's interesting, too, because I had figured that Minchukov would be that next guy, and maybe Lacombe as well. But yeah, it's Olin Zellweger. Very good season for him thus far. And so he's my pick from the Anaheim Ducks. And you guys can let me know in the comment section below players that you feel like are having underrated, pretty good seasons so far. For the New York Islanders, a defenseman who it looked like was going to spend most of his career in the American Hockey League going forward, but Chalowski's been good for the Islanders. The injuries on the blue line allow openings. Chalowski jumps in. I think he's been pretty good. Once their blue line gets healthier, it'll be interesting to see what his role is and whether or not maybe that'll improve his value, and if maybe he ends up being moved, or maybe it frees up somebody else to be moved on that blue line when everybody gets healthy. But I think Chalowski's been good. Pittsburgh. For Pittsburgh, I'm going to give credit where credit's due. I think picking up Beauvillier was a good move. Beauvillier not producing like he did early in the season, but I think he's still been good for Pittsburgh. And so he's my pick there. I do like to pick players who aren't being talked about by everybody. So that's the reason I'm picking Beauvillier, on top of the fact that he has been a very good player for them at times, very effective. And I don't know that we saw that bounce back coming from him, but he's still producing. He's still playing well. Not producing at the rate he was earlier in the season, but still playing well. For the New York Rangers, yes, of course I can find a Ranger. I can find a Ranger who I don't think Ranger fans will disagree with me about. Philip Hedl. So while everything in and around the New York Rangers seems to be on fire, and not in the good way, Hedl has been very, very good. And he does deal with injuries. We know this. We know with his concussion history, that's always going to be something we're keeping an eye on with him. But when he's in the lineup and he's playing well, Hedl is one of those really, really good young forwards. And when they talk about untouchables for the New York Rangers, I think Hedl should be an untouchable, because he seems like the kind of player that if you trade him somewhere else and he gets a chance to play first line minutes on another team, like say for like San Jose or an Anaheim, something like that, or Chicago, right? I think he'll make you pay. I think you'll look back and go, we probably should have given Hedl those minutes. So maybe at some point in time, Hedl gets to go on that first power play unit. If it continues to struggle, I don't think he's on the first power play. I think he's on the second power play unit. Anyways, that's a whole other discussion. Washington. We talked a lot about McMichael, and I've definitely talked a lot about Dylan Strome. Let's talk about Alexei Protas. Protas got an extension from them last season, which he's now grown into. Protas has become exactly what the Washington Capitals were hoping he would become, and he's been excellent. So when we're talking about the Capitals and how good their play has been and how well this team has done, I think Alexei Protas deserves some credit for that. And just the organization in general, the way it's structured, and how well things have been run in Hershey. And now we're starting to see that pay dividends for the Washington Capitals, the parent club as well. Protas is one of those players. Columbus. So for Columbus, I don't hear a lot about Kent Johnson. So I'm going to put Kent Johnson on the board. Now he's above a point per game. So qualifying him as under the radar might be a little bit tricky, but I don't hear a lot about Kent Johnson. I hear more about Marchenko. Various other players like Voronkov, but I think Kent Johnson, the tricky part for him is staying healthy. If he can stay healthy, I think he will become a star. And then the question becomes, when is Fantilli's turn? When is he going to become that next level player that they believe he's going to become? I don't know the timeline on that necessarily, but Kent Johnson's been playing well for them. For Philadelphia, I do feel like over the upcoming years, Emile Andre could become one of those ones that I talk about a lot. Emile Andre has been good. He has absolutely been very good for them. I like Andre, and I've said that back to when he last played for Canada at the World Juniors. I think he's a very good, strong player. So Emil Andre's my pick from the Philadelphia Flyers, a blue line that's sometimes maligned. I don't know how fair that is. I think they do a pretty good job of preventing prime opportunities on Fedotov, Kolosov, and Ersson, of course. I don't think their defense is as bad as sometimes people point it out to be. I think it's just Philadelphia because they're in this rebuild. Maybe people overlook how well certain players are playing, and I think Andre's that guy for them. For Carolina, you know, when Carolina made the changes they did in the offseason, there was a lot of talk about how they're no longer a contender. And maybe at the end of the year, maybe they're not. But Dmitry Orlov is having a ridiculous season for the Carolina Hurricanes. Gostisbehere's racking up the points, but Orlov's not that far behind him. And if you look at the defensive numbers and everything, Orlov's been quite good. So I like Orlov's game. I think that Carolina's got one of the better blue lines in the National Hockey League. And I think it's almost video worthy at this point to look at a couple of teams and changes made in the offseason, and Carolina would be one of them, and how well they've gone. I think I could do a video on Carolina and Florida side by side and say, here's who they lost, here's who they gained. And I think you'd see that they saved some money. Both teams saved some money, and they're better. And I think Orlov's playing some of his best hockey in his career right now with Carolina. For New Jersey, going with Dawson Mercer. Mercer's one of those players that if you watch him play enough, you'll be questioning why he doesn't have more points. He's a hard worker, very good all-around player, who I think at some point in time he's going to have one of those career years with 30 goals, 80 points, that kind of thing. It's not going to be this year, but at some point I do think Mercer's going to have that big offensive season. And at that point, people are going to take notice, and maybe they'll notice his all-around game. But Mercer is a lot of fun to watch. Of the players in New Jersey, Mercer's one of those guys I'm really rooting for. And so, yeah, Mercer is my pick. Tampa Bay, Mitchell Chaffee. And I'm not sure what it is with Chaffee's game, but I like his game. He is one of those players that Tampa Bay has developed that we didn't really know much about before he came up, but I think he's pretty good. And like other Tampa Bay players before him, I think as the years go by, his role will grow. And he'll probably end up being a pretty good, solid top 9 forward who maybe gets around the 20, 30 goal mark at some point. And as crazy as that might sound, Tampa Bay has basically got a really good track record of developing players that come up, play well in their system, and end up becoming pretty good National Hockey League players as well. So Chaffee's my pick for Tampa. For Boston, Justin Brazeau. It hasn't been a fantastic season in Boston, but it has been exciting watching Brazeau develop into the player he has. There's some points there from him, and I think there's room for more from him. His game just works at the NHL level, and he's a lot of fun to watch. A lot of energy. Koepke would get an honorable mention from me as well. I think Cole Koepke's been a good addition. Boston's been let down really in terms of the production from the top guys. Guys like Brazeau have been excellent. Their bottom 6, honestly, this year has been pretty good for Boston. Ottawa. For Ottawa, what an addition Nick Jensen's been. So Chychrun goes the other way. Chychrun's been a pretty good addition for the Washington Capitals, absolutely. But Jensen's defensive numbers are fantastic. And he's never going to be a big point producer, but I think Nick Jensen has had a really strong run in Ottawa. And it's interesting because that's a player that he's played for years in the NHL. I don't know that I've ever had him on a list. I don't think I have. I think playing in Ottawa, I think he might be playing the best hockey I've seen him play. Either that, or conversely, you could say Ottawa's defense not as good as Washington's, and maybe he stands out a little bit more in relation, right? So maybe that's where the truth lies, but either way, he's on the board for Ottawa. For Buffalo, yes, there's positives. There absolutely is. McLeod. So when the Savoy for McLeod trade was happened, everybody and their dog was saying, Edmonton wins this going away. What a stupid trade for Buffalo. This is a terrible decision. Now, usually, if you say this was a terrible decision by the Sabres, you're usually right. I think McLeod's been a fantastic addition. And I think if you look at the numbers, McLeod's been one of their stronger, more consistent forwards. Excellent two-way play. And there is still more offensive upside there with him. Every now and then you'll see something from him that it's showing you that there's more under the surface with Ryan McLeod. And he's a relatively young player too. So while Buffalo's season has been largely in the range of a tire fire, sure, not quite. I mean, depending on the day, it might be a tire fire, it might be a palm tree. But Ryan McLeod's been a solid addition. I'm not going to forget that. That is the greatest thing. Anyways, but yeah, Ryan McLeod I think was a solid addition. Savoy has yet to play for the Edmonton Oilers, so yeah, McLeod's seen as more NHL ready, obviously, because he's already been in the NHL. But it's been a good pickup. Florida. Florida. Basically, as I mentioned before with Carolina, Florida and Carolina are teams that replace players because, salary cap exists and everything, and they get good value. And Kulikov has been excellent for Florida. And it is another example of how Florida picks up a player, and you think to yourself, well, I don't know. I mean, I've seen him play, and I don't know how that's going to work. And then it just does. And Kulikov has been excellent for Florida. Their defense in general has been very good this season. And I don't know that I expected that. If you told me before the season started some of these names would be on a board like this, I would say, why? And there may very well be comments of that in the comment section too. But yeah, Kulikov has been kind of fun to watch this year. Montreal. Full respect to Jake Evans. Evans does everything for Montreal. And if Evans played a little further up the lineup, I think there's some offense there too. Jake Evans is a player that no matter what team you root for, if Jake Evans was on your team, you're cheering for him. It's not totally dissimilar to like Kiefer Sherwood, who started this. That if he's not on your team, maybe you're not aware of how good he is, but once he's on your team, you realize I like this Evans. His game's not perfect by any stretch, and nobody's game's necessarily perfect that's on the board, but he's a lot of fun to watch, a lot of energy, and busts his ass every shift. That's what you're looking for in a player. That's what you're going to get with Evans. For Detroit, I went with Edmondson. Maurice Seider gets all the attention on the Detroit blue line. Totally understandable. Hall's contract gets a lot of attention. That's understandable. But Edmondson is quietly putting together a pretty solid season for a young defenseman. And there is a ton of potential there with Edmondson as well. So while Detroit's season hasn't gone the way that they had hoped or expected, Edmondson has been very, very good. So he's my vote from Detroit. For Toronto, Toronto's difficult because they are covered a lot. A lot. But McMahon. Bobby McMahon. What a player. And kind of came out of nowhere. And this kid's fantastic. He's excellent. The Toronto Maple Leafs have a team that is probably better than people think. However, and I'm saying that outside of the Toronto fan base, things probably better than people think. But nobody's going to be convinced otherwise until they show their moxie in the playoffs. So whatever they're doing during the regular season, people may not pay as much attention, and maybe what Bobby McMahon's doing gets swept under the rug a little bit because, well, A, he's injured right now. So there's that. But B, that core four gets a lot of the attention, or almost all the attention, and rightfully so. Most of the goals involve those guys. But I think McMahon, kind of a solid player on his own right. Colorado. So for the Abs, Kivi Uranta. Kivi Uranta, his last year in Dallas wasn't fantastic. I remember when he went to Colorado thinking, well, it's too bad we lose Kivi Uranta. Kivi Uranta had that big goal in the 2020 run for Dallas. He was beloved by the audience. But, fans / audience understand that teams move on. But Kivi Uranta has really done quite well in Colorado. And while all the attention's been on some defensive miscues and on the goaltending in Colorado, Kivi Uranta, I think, has had a very strong run this season. He's never going to score you a lot of points. He's never going to get a lot of goals. But Kivi Uranta is a good energy forward, good forechecker, and I think he's been a solid addition. So they picked up Nichushkin, who'd been a star. They pick up Kivi Uranta. They're pretty good at picking up former Dallas stars. Minnesota. On the Minnesota side, there was only one pick. There was only one guy I could put on this board. I'm glad to see that people are starting to really pick up on the Jake Middleton hype. Middleton has been ridiculous for Minnesota. I don't know what's in the water that he's been drinking. I don't know what he's been doing that's different from previous seasons. I don't know if he changed anything. I don't know if the coach has changed something with him, but he's playing the best hockey he has ever. And he is on Minnesota. I think he's one of their probably top three defensemen, top two or top three. Minnesota has a lot of good defensemen. You got Faber, you got Spurgeon as two examples, you got Brodin as well. I think Middleton's outplayed a couple of those guys. I think Middleton's been fantastic, and the points are there, the goals are there from Jake Middleton. It is a career year, and you ride it out when it's a career year. And if he does this all season, he's not going to get Norris votes, but he's going to win more and more people over. Utah, Utah. There was only one pick for me with Utah. When they acquired Kesselring, it was kind of one of those afterthoughts. It was a trade where it was a player to be named later, and he comes over from Edmonton. And I was like, I don't know, Michael Kesselring. Thinking to myself, well, it's Arizona, and they don't have the depth that Edmonton does. So Kesselring will probably get into some games here. I don't know, is he going to be a long-term player? Kesselring's been fantastic this year. He has been very, very good for Utah. I see a lot of talk about Sergachev and how good Sergachev is, and he is, but I think Kesselring deserves a lot of credit too. He has been one of the better defensemen on that Utah Hockey Club, and a lot of fun to watch. And that's the key thing: be fun to watch, which Kesselring's been this year. Winnipeg. For Winnipeg, I kind of had to go with the captain. Adam Lowry, I think, is having the best season of his career. And he's getting better as he gets older. I think he's getting better offensively as he gets older, too. So, yeah, Lowry is legitimately a really, really positive player in terms of his impact on the Winnipeg Jets. And I haven't seen him have a bad game this year that I can remember. I don't remember Lowry having a bad game. Even though the Jets have been 4-6 over their last 10, I can't think of a time where I'm like, that was on Lowry. Maybe there's been a goal somewhere, but really, Lowry doesn't commit boneheaded turnovers. He's a very solid player all around, and so I thought Lowry deserved to be on the board. For Chicago, so before the season started, we find out Laurent Brossoit isn't going to play for a while, and so that leaves Soderblom there. Now, Mrazek and Soderblom, well, that's your tandem from last year, so the expectation that they'd be better than last year wasn't really there. Mrazek, I think, has played about the same as last year, which is very good, but Soderblom's been fantastic. Soderblom's now making the argument that when Brossoit comes back, they have a very good goaltending situation, and maybe Soderblom ends up being on the trade block. Of the three goaltenders, maybe he's the one that ends up being, or maybe Brossoit ends up being the guy who's on the block if they decide Soderblom is playing well enough to keep him around. And I'm pretty sure Soderblom would need waivers to go down to the minors right now. Pretty sure he's played enough games for that. And I don't think he'd clear waivers right now. So Chicago's kind of a very fun situation for themselves that they'll have three pretty good goaltenders once Brossoit's healthy. So when Brossoit had his setback, and it delays his debut this season, no reason to panic because Soderblom's playing really well. Dallas, I'm going to go with a defenseman here for Dallas, and that's Thomas Harley. Harley's not getting the goals like he did last year, but he's playing very, very well. Some nights he's arguably their best defenseman. I'll say arguably because that's where the Miro Heiskanen fans will come in and go, are you kidding me? Seriously, you can't put him ahead of Miro even in a game. But at times, I think Harley's played the best of any of the defensemen there. Harley's progression has been there, and I think that the rest of the NHL is going to pick up on how good he is soon enough. St. Louis, as we get towards the end of this, and this one kind of feels like a cop-out, but I want to talk about Philip Broberg and how his game, it's gone to that next level. And what's interesting is I think Dylan Holloway's has too. And if Holloway and Broberg hadn't signed those offer sheets and if they'd stayed in Edmonton, I don't know if they would have made this progression in Edmonton. I think they're being offered a chance with St. Louis, who maybe didn't have quite the depth chart that Edmonton does. They're getting a chance to play more, play in key situations, and they're showing what they can do. So I picked Broberg. I could easily have picked Holloway as well, although I think Holloway gets plenty of attention. Broberg has been a revelation so far for St. Louis in the games that he's played. I have to throw that in there because he did miss some games with injury. But yeah, Broberg, excellent. And of course, with the switch behind the bench, St. Louis might be a team to watch. the rest of the way. Which rounds us out with Nashville. And the idea that, well, who's playing well in Nashville? Who'd be under the radar? It's not easy to find a player right now, but I'm going to go with Evangelista. I know that the numbers overwhelmingly are bad in Nashville, but Evangelista, there's still something there. There's definitely something there with that young player, and I don't know if they're going to end up trading him. I hope not, but with their track record, that could happen. I don't think he's going to end up on waivers, which does happen at times with their good young players. But Evangelista's been good on a team that has had a really, really rough go of it. Only have 7 wins so far. So there you go. Those are my picks from each team. Let me know your picks. Let me know players that you think are having an under-the-radar, pretty good season, or players who don't get quite the amount of attention that others do. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe in the event you may not have done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again soon.